Is that my wife? And why does that child look like me?
What a lovely day for a walk, isn't it?
Yes, Mommy. Can we get ice cream?
Of course.
After 3 years, cheating husband found out wife had given birth to a son you won't believe. Esteemed viewers, welcome to Luxurious True Life Stories. Please like and subscribe for more captivating luxury true stories. Let's get into the story. Rita Newton lived a quiet, organized life centered on compassion. At 29, she worked as a pediatric nurse, known for her calming presence and gentle smile. She enjoyed simple routines, morning walks, homemade meals, and phone calls with her father, Harold, who had raised her to value patience and emotional strength. Rita dreamed of marriage and a child someday, believing love should feel safe and mutual. Daniel Reed was admired for his discipline and rising success as an architect. He carried himself with confidence and rarely allowed emotion to interfere with his goals. His mother, Margaret, had taught him that stability came from achievement, not sentiment. Though respected professionally, Daniel's personal life remained carefully controlled, leaving little room for unpredictability. They met at a winter charity gala when Rita accidentally spilled sparkling water near his table. Instead of irritation, Daniel laughed, and the tension dissolved instantly. Conversation flowed with surprising ease, each intrigued by the other's calm intelligence. As the night ended, Daniel asked to see her again, and Rita walked away with a quiet feeling that something important had just begun. Rita and Daniel's relationship progressed with effortless rhythm. Their dates were simple but meaningful, early dinners, long city walks, and quiet conversations that stretched late into the night. Daniel admired Rita's warmth, while she felt protected by his certainty. Within a year, he proposed during a rooftop dinner beneath soft lights, promising her a future built on loyalty and shared dreams. Their wedding drew admiration from friends and colleagues alike. Rita stepped into marriage with excitement, carefully turning Daniel's modern house into a welcoming home filled with color and life. For a time, everything felt balanced. Mornings began with coffee together, and evenings ended in comfortable silence. Rita believed she had found the partnership she had always hoped for. But ambition slowly tightened its grip on Daniel. Bigger projects demanded longer hours, and work calls often interrupted dinners. He spoke frequently about legacy and financial growth, while Rita quietly prioritized connection. Though she noticed the shift, she reassured herself that demanding seasons passed. Love, she believed, only needed patience to remain strong. Months passed, and the gentle rhythm of their marriage began to thin. Rita noticed the small changes first, Daniel answering messages during meals, arriving home later than promised, and carrying a constant air of distraction. When she spoke about starting a family, he agreed politely but without enthusiasm, as if adding it to a distant checklist rather than a shared dream. After a year without conceiving, concern quietly settled between them. Rita scheduled medical appointments, hoping for clarity, while Daniel approached the situation with uncomfortable practicality. He began tracking dates, suggesting specialists, and speaking about timing with clinical detachment. What Rita longed for was reassurance, yet their conversations felt increasingly procedural. Emotional space widened. Daniel buried himself deeper in work, convincing himself that success would secure their future. Rita responded with patience, masking her worry behind soft smiles. Still, some nights she lay awake sensing a shift she could not name, a fragile distance forming where warmth once lived, growing quietly but steadily. Determined to understand the delay, Rita completed a series of medical tests. She approached each visit with cautious optimism, believing answers would ease the quiet tension at home. When the results arrived, however, a reporting error suggested a serious fertility concern. The doctor advised a retest, but the uncertainty alone was enough to unsettle everything. Daniel focused only on the troubling possibility. Though Rita explained the need for confirmation, his demeanor shifted almost overnight. He became withdrawn, speaking less about the future they once planned so easily. Practical solutions replaced emotional support, and his tone carried a distance that made Rita feel unexpectedly alone. Rita held on to hope, trusting the follow-up would correct the mistake. Yet something had already changed in Daniel's perception. Where patience once lived, doubt quietly took root. Without realizing it, he began preparing himself for a life different from the one they had imagined together. Daniel's newest project required frequent travel, and the distance from home slowly became something he stopped resisting. One evening after a long investor dinner, he lingered in a quiet hotel lounge, too restless to return to his room. That was where he noticed Kamala Elijah, composed, observant, and strikingly confident. She carried herself with the ease of someone who understood exactly how to command attention without asking for it. The conversation began casually but quickly deepened. Kamala listened with sharp interest as Daniel spoke about ambition and pressure, offering sympathy without questions that felt too personal. Unlike the emotional weight waiting for him at home, this interaction felt effortless. Kamala revealed little about herself, yet her mystery drew him in, creating a space where he could momentarily forget responsibility. What Daniel dismissed as a harmless distraction soon became intentional. Messages followed, then private meetings arranged around his travel schedule. Each step blurred a line he once believed he would never cross. Back home, Rita remained trusting, unaware that a quiet fracture had begun, one that would soon widen beyond repair. What began as occasional meetings soon hardened into a pattern Daniel no longer tried to justify. He told himself he deserved an escape from the pressure that seemed to follow him everywhere, the expectations at work, the silent strain at home, the unspoken fear that his carefully built life might not unfold as planned. With Kamala, everything felt uncomplicated. She laughed easily, admired his discipline, and never asked him to explain the parts of himself he preferred to keep hidden. Daniel rented a discreet apartment across the city under the pretense of needing a quiet workspace. In truth, it became the center of a life he carefully separated from his marriage. Maintaining the illusion required precision, something Daniel excelled at. He adjusted his schedule, delayed flights on purpose, and created meetings that existed only on his calendar. When Rita asked about his exhaustion, he blamed expanding contracts and demanding clients. She responded with concern rather than suspicion, preparing late dinners and leaving the hallway lamp on for him when he returned after midnight. Her steady care stirred brief moments of guilt, but Daniel learned to silence them quickly. He convinced himself that what Rita didn't know could not hurt her, ignoring the subtle truth that emotional absence often wounds more deeply than visible betrayal. Yet deception has a quiet weight. Daniel noticed it in the way he hesitated before answering simple questions and in the growing effort required to appear present. Meanwhile, Rita sensed a change she could not fully explain. Conversations grew shorter, laughter rarer. Sometimes she caught him staring into nothing, as if his thoughts belonged elsewhere. Still, she chose trust, believing difficult seasons tested commitment rather than destroyed it. Daniel, however, was already living in two emotional worlds, unaware that the balance he thought he controlled was becoming dangerously fragile. The discovery came quietly, without warning or drama. One Saturday morning, Rita sat at the dining table reviewing household expenses when a notification from their shared financial account appeared. A large recurring payment had been processed to a property management company she did not recognize. At first, she assumed it was tied to one of Daniel's projects, but something about the amount, and its monthly repetition, felt personal rather than professional. When Daniel stepped out to take a call, Rita's curiosity overcame her hesitation. She searched the address attached to the payment. The building was residential. Her pulse slowed, not quickened, as if her body refused to react before her mind accepted what it meant. That afternoon, while Daniel claimed he had an urgent site visit, Rita drove to the address herself. The neighborhood was quiet, lined with modern apartments and trimmed hedges. She remained in her car longer than necessary, gathering courage she never imagined needing. Then she saw him, Daniel, walking toward the entrance beside a woman whose confidence was unmistakable. Kamala. They were close enough that their familiarity required no explanation. Daniel leaned toward her, speaking softly, and she smiled in a way that suggested this was ordinary. Rita did not confront him there. She drove home slowly, her thoughts unusually clear. Shock did not arrive as chaos but as a deep, steady ache spreading through her chest. That evening, she prepared dinner as usual, studying Daniel across the table while he spoke casually about work. The normalcy of his tone fractured something inside her more than the sight she had witnessed. When she finally asked about the apartment, the color drained from his face before he could compose himself. Silence filled the room, heavy and irreversible. In that moment, Rita understood that the marriage she had protected with patience had already been abandoned. She was only the last to know. The confrontation unfolded later that night, long after the dishes were cleared, but neither of them had moved from the living room. Rita sat upright, her hands folded tightly in her lap to stop their trembling. She did not raise her voice when she spoke. The quietness carried far more weight. She asked one question at a time, each delivered with careful control, giving Daniel space to offer truth if he chose it. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then came explanations, stress, confusion, emotional distance, reasons that sounded rehearsed even as he formed them. Rita listened without interruption, but the calm on her face was not acceptance. It was the steady composure of someone watching a reality rearrange itself beyond recognition. When Daniel finally admitted the relationship had been ongoing, something in his posture shifted from defensive to resolute. He spoke as though a decision had already been made internally. What startled Rita most was not the confession but the absence of visible remorse. His tone carried the cool logic he used in business negotiations, as if their marriage were a contract that no longer served its purpose. Then the words came, sharp, irreversible. Daniel claimed their future had stalled, that he could not remain in a marriage shadowed by uncertainty about children. He repeated the medical concern as though it were settled fact, calling her barren with the detachment that made the room feel suddenly unfamiliar. The word hung in the air long after he stopped speaking. Rita inhaled slowly, absorbing the blow without allowing it to shatter her composure. Tears threatened but did not fall. Instead, a profound stillness settled over her. In that silence, she recognized a painful clarity. Love could not survive where respect had quietly disappeared. Morning arrived without softness. Pale light filtered through the curtains, illuminating a house that no longer felt like Rita's home. She rose early, moving with deliberate calm, and began placing her belongings into two modest suitcases. There was no dramatic urgency in her actions, only quiet finality. Each folded sweater, each framed photograph she chose to keep, marked the closing of a chapter she had once believed would last a lifetime. Daniel watched from the doorway for a moment but said nothing. Whatever words had existed between them seemed to have expired overnight. Rita called to car instead of asking for help. Pride was not guiding her. Dignity was. Before leaving, she paused in the living room and allowed herself one slow breath, committing the space to memory not with longing but with acceptance. When Daniel finally spoke, it was practical, questions about legal steps, timelines, logistics. His composure confirmed what Rita already understood. Emotionally, he had left long before this morning. She nodded politely, unwilling to spend her last energy arguing with someone who no longer stood beside her in spirit. The drive away felt strangely peaceful. Grief was present, but beneath it lived something steadier, self-preservation. Rita checked into a small extended-stay hotel on the edge of the city, its simplicity offering anonymity and quiet. That evening, she contacted an attorney and began the process of dissolving the marriage without spectacle. Alone in the unfamiliar room, she finally allowed tears to fall, not only for what she had lost but for the version of her life that would never exist. Yet somewhere beneath the sorrow, a fragile strength began forming. Walking away had not broken her. It had revealed just how strong she had always been. Weeks passed with measured progress. The divorce moved forward quietly, paperwork replacing emotion, signatures closing doors that words no longer could. Rita focused on stability, securing a small apartment with wide windows that welcomed the morning sun. She returned to work, accepting longer shifts simply to keep her thoughts occupied. Though exhaustion often followed her home, routine became her anchor. Slowly, the sharpness of betrayal dulled into something more manageable, a scar rather than an open wound. One afternoon, however, a sudden wave of dizziness forced her to sit during a patient round. A colleague insisted she visit a nearby clinic before finishing her shift. Rita expected to hear she was overworked or dehydrated, nothing more. Instead, after a brief examination, the doctor studied her chart twice, then looked up with gentle certainty. She was pregnant. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Rita did not speak. She simply stared, allowing the words to settle into reality. The timing was undeniable. This child had been conceived shortly before everything fell apart. Emotions rose all at once: shock, relief, fear, and a fragile, growing joy. The label once placed upon her had been wrong, yet the man who spoke it was no longer part of her life. Walking home, she rested a hand lightly against her abdomen, overwhelmed by the quiet miracle unfolding within her. That night, after hours of reflection, Rita made a decision rooted not in anger but in protection. This child would enter a world shaped by love, not rejection. Whatever lay ahead, she understood one thing with sudden clarity: her story was not ending, it was beginning again. Rita told no one at first. The news felt too delicate, too sacred to expose before she fully understood her own strength. Each morning, she woke with a cautious awareness, as if guarding a small, steady flame from sudden wind. At work, she adjusted her pace, accepting help when needed but revealing little. Only her doctor and attorney knew, both advising her to focus on calm and consistency. Daniel's name crossed her mind occasionally, not with longing, but with the firm understanding that his presence would only complicate a future she was determined to protect. Practical changes followed quickly. Rita transferred to a quieter hospital branch closer to her apartment and began saving with careful discipline. Evenings were spent reading about motherhood, nutrition, and emotional wellness. She replaced anxiety with preparation, transforming uncertainty into quiet readiness. Sometimes she spoke softly into the stillness of her home, imagining the life growing within her could somehow hear reassurance in her voice. Rather than fear the responsibility ahead, she found herself slowly welcoming it. One evening, as golden light filled the living room, Rita stood before the window and made her choice complete. She would not inform Daniel. Not now. Perhaps not ever. The decision was not revenge. It was clarity. He had walked away when he believed she could give him nothing. Now she owed him no access to the fragile beginning she carried. Resting her palm gently over her abdomen, Rita felt something stronger than hope take root. It was resolve, steady and unshakable, guiding her toward a future she would build on her own terms. Rita relocated before her pregnancy began to show, choosing a quiet lakeside town several hours away. The streets were calmer, the air cleaner, and unfamiliar faces offered the comfort of anonymity. Her apartment was smaller than any home she had lived in before, yet sunlight poured through tall windows each morning, warming the wooden floors. She furnished it simply: soft colors, practical pieces, and a rocking chair she assembled herself one patient afternoon. For the first time in months, her environment felt entirely her own, untouched by painful memory. She soon learned that starting over required courage in ordinary moments. Introducing herself to new co-workers, locating grocery stores, memorizing unfamiliar roads, each task reminded her she was building a life from the ground up. Her neighbors were kind but respectful of space, offering polite greetings without intrusion. Rita found comfort in routine again, walking slowly by the lake after work, breathing deeply as the water reflected changing skies. With every passing week, her confidence strengthened. She was no longer defined by what had ended but by what she was creating. On a quiet evening, she noticed the first unmistakable flutter within her, a gentle movement, brief yet undeniable. Rita froze, one hand instinctively resting where the sensation had appeared. Emotion rose quickly, filling her chest with wonder rather than fear. In that silent apartment, she smiled through unexpected tears. The future was no longer an abstract idea. It was alive, growing, and reaching toward her. Whatever challenges waited ahead, she understood she would not face them as a woman who had been abandoned, but as someone stepping fully into a new world shaped by resilience and hope. Winter arrived softly the night Rita went into labor. Snow drifted past the hospital windows in slow spirals, muting the world outside and wrapping everything in quiet. Though the contractions were strong, Rita remained composed, focusing on steady breaths and the reassuring voices guiding her through each stage. Hours blurred together until a sharp cry finally filled the room, clear, powerful, alive. When the nurse placed the child gently into her arms, time seemed to pause. Rita studied his tiny features, overwhelmed by a love so immediate it felt instinctive rather than learned. She named him Noah, a name that spoke of endurance and safe passage through life's storms. His small fingers curled naturally around hers, anchoring her in a reality more beautiful than anything she had imagined during those uncertain months. Fatigue lingered, yet it could not compete with the quiet joy spreading through her chest. In that moment, every painful word from the past lost its authority. She was not lacking. She was entrusted with something extraordinary. The days that followed were tender and transformative. Rita learned Noah's rhythms, the way he settled at the sound of her voice, the calm that followed when she held him close. Nights were short, but fulfillment replaced exhaustion. Sitting beside the window one early morning, Noah asleep against her shoulder, Rita whispered a promise into the gentle light. He would grow surrounded by patience, dignity, and unwavering love. Her life had not been reduced by loss. It had expanded in the most unexpected way. While Rita's world expanded with warmth, Daniel's began to narrow in ways he could not immediately explain. Life with Kamala had once felt exciting, spontaneous trips, elegant dinners, conversations free of responsibility. Yet the energy that first drew him in slowly shifted into unpredictability. Kamala's moods changed without warning. Some days she was affectionate and magnetic, other days distant behind a guarded silence. Daniel ignored the unease, convincing himself that every relationship required adjustment. Then came the fatigue. At first, it was subtle, a lingering exhaustion even after a full night's sleep. Soon it was joined by persistent discomfort he struggled to describe. He blamed stress, increasing his work hours as if productivity alone could overpower what his body was signaling. Kamala urged him to relax, but her concern felt inconsistent, appearing briefly before dissolving into distraction. Daniel postponed medical appointments, unwilling to see himself as someone vulnerable. One morning, however, dizziness forced him to sit during an important presentation. The room steadied after a moment, but something inside him shifted permanently. For the first time, Daniel sensed that control, the principle he had always relied upon, might be slipping. As he stared at his reflection later that evening, he barely recognized the tired expression looking back. Success surrounded him, yet an unfamiliar fragility had begun to surface, forming the first quiet crack in the life he believed was unshakable. Daniel finally sought medical advice after the fatigue became impossible to ignore. The tests were thorough, the waiting uncomfortable. When the physician spoke, his tone was careful but unmistakably serious. Daniel was diagnosed with a significant internal illness, manageable with treatment but life-altering if neglected. The news landed heavily. For a man who built his identity on strength and certainty, the realization that his own body required humility unsettled him more than he admitted aloud. He returned home expecting reassurance, but Camilla reacted with restless impatience rather than comfort. She avoided long discussions, often leaving the apartment for hours without explanation. Daniel assumed she needed time to process the situation, unaware that her distance carried a different motive. One afternoon, while attempting to transfer funds for an upcoming treatment plan, he noticed several accounts had been quietly depleted. Transactions he did not authorize had been executed gradually, carefully enough to escape immediate detection. Camilla was gone before evening. No message, no forwarding contact, only absence where her belongings once stood. The silence felt louder than any confrontation. Daniel sat alone, absorbing the layered reality, his health uncertain, his finances shaken, and the person he trusted vanished without farewell. In the stillness, a realization surfaced with uncomfortable clarity. The pain he now felt mirrored the very abandonment he had once caused. For the first time in years, regret did not arrive as a passing thought. It settled deeply, refusing to be ignored. The months that followed tested Daniel in ways success had never prepared him for. Treatment schedules replaced business lunches, and quiet recovery days interrupted the momentum he once guarded fiercely. Investors grew cautious as his availability declined, and projects he would have managed effortlessly now demanded delegation. Control, the principle he had lived by, continued slipping through his grasp. Even his home felt unfamiliar, too spacious, too silent, echoing with the absence of the life he thought he had chosen. Margaret Reed noticed the change immediately. Age had softened her once rigid outlook, and seeing her son diminished stirred a protective tenderness she rarely displayed. She encouraged him to rest, to accept help, to reconsider the pace at which he had been running for years. During one particularly still afternoon, she asked a question he could not easily dismiss, whether ambition had cost him something irreplaceable. Daniel did not answer, but the thought lingered long after the conversation ended. Alone that evening, he found himself reflecting not on lost wealth but on lost steadiness, the warmth of ordinary dinners, the quiet loyalty he once overlooked. Regret surfaced not as sharp pain, but as a heavy awareness that some choices could not be revised. Though his future remained uncertain, one truth had begun to settle within him: the life he had carefully constructed was not collapsing all at once. It was unraveling thread by thread, urging him to confront the man he had become. 3 years reshaped Rita's life with quiet determination. Her small beginnings gradually grew into something remarkable, a respected pediatric wellness center known for its compassion and thoughtful care. Parents trusted her judgment, children greeted her with easy smiles, and her days carried the satisfying rhythm of purpose. The uncertainty that once shadowed her had been replaced by steady confidence. She was no longer simply surviving, she was building. Noah thrived under her gentle guidance. At 3, he possessed a calm curiosity, studying the world with observant eyes that seemed older than his years. He loved picture books, morning pancakes, and the small park near their home where he chased birds with delighted laughter. Rita noticed traits that felt strikingly familiar: his focused expression when concentrating, the quiet way he assessed new spaces, but she never lingered on the resemblance. To her, Noah was wholly his own person, shaped by love rather than memory. One bright afternoon, Rita received an invitation to speak briefly at the Coastal Health and Design Expo about creating child-friendly healing spaces. She accepted without hesitation, seeing it as another step forward. Holding Noah's hand as they walked toward the expansive glass venue days later, she felt a calm pride settle within her. Life had not returned to what it once was. It had evolved into something stronger. Neither of them knew that within those crowded halls, a moment awaited that would gently but permanently reconnect past and present. The expo buzzed with quiet energy, professionals exchanging ideas, soft conversations blending with distant footsteps across polished floors. Rita moved confidently between displays, Noah close beside her, his small hand wrapped securely around her fingers. He watched everything with wide curiosity, occasionally pointing at colorful models that captured his attention. Rita smiled often, unaware that across the hall, someone had just stopped walking entirely. Daniel had not planned to attend the event for long. His doctor had encouraged lighter routines, and a colleague suggested the outing might help him reconnect with the professional world. He walked slowly, conserving energy, when a familiar presence drew his gaze without warning. At first, recognition came gently. Rita looked stronger, composed, carrying a quiet assurance he did not remember seeing before. Then his eyes shifted downward. The child standing beside her stirred something immediate and undeniable. It was not merely resemblance. It was the subtle details, the steady posture, the thoughtful way the boy scanned the room, the unmistakable shape of his eyes. Daniel felt the air leave his lungs as realization pressed in without permission. He did not approach right away. He simply stood there, absorbing the scene as past choices rearranged themselves in his mind. When Noah looked up briefly, their eyes met for a fleeting second, and an unexplainable certainty settled deep within Daniel. Some encounters feel accidental. This one did not. Daniel did not sleep that night. The image of the child replayed endlessly in his thoughts, the familiar eyes, the quiet alertness, even the way he stood close to Rita with natural trust. By morning, uncertainty had transformed into a need for clarity he could no longer suppress. Gathering what remained of his courage, he returned to the expo venue the following day after confirming Rita would still be there for a scheduled session. When Rita saw him approaching, surprise crossed her face, but it quickly settled into calm restraint. Years had refined her composure. She greeted him politely, neither warm nor cold. Daniel spoke carefully, his voice carrying a gravity she had never heard before. He asked about the boy. Rita held his gaze for a long moment, understanding that this question had always been inevitable. There was no anger in her expression, only steadiness. "Yes," she said quietly when he asked what his heart already knew. "Noah is your son." The words did not echo. They landed with profound stillness. Daniel lowered himself into a nearby chair as the weight of lost years pressed heavily upon him. Every assumption he once made unraveled in seconds, the label he had given her, the future he had abandoned, the child he never imagined existed. Regret moved through him not as chaos but as deep, humbling clarity. Across from him stood the life that might have been his, growing strong without him. Rita explained only what was necessary. She had learned of the pregnancy after the divorce and chose peace over reopening wounds. Noah had been raised in stability, surrounded by care, untouched by bitterness. Daniel listened without interruption, recognizing that explanations could not rewrite absence. When he finally looked toward the child again, a quiet realization settled within him. The truth was not something he could argue with, deny, or undo. It was simply something he must now learn to face. They spoke again later that afternoon, away from the crowd, seated on a bench overlooking the water. The distance between them felt appropriate, no longer hostile, yet no longer intimate. Daniel did not ask for forgiveness. He seemed to understand that such things cannot be requested on command. Instead, he acknowledged his failures with unguarded honesty. Illness and loss had stripped away the certainty he once hid behind, leaving a man far more aware of what truly endures. Rita listened, but her strength no longer required his validation. She had built a life defined by intention, not reaction. When Daniel asked if he might someday know Noah, she considered the question carefully. Her answer was measured. Noah's well-being would always come first, and trust would have to grow slowly, proven through consistency rather than promises. The past would not be rewritten, but the future could still be guided responsibly. As they parted, Noah ran toward Rita with the bright ease only children possess. She lifted him gently, and he rested his head against her shoulder, completely secure. Daniel watched quietly, not with the sharp pain of regret alone but with a fragile sense of possibility. Redemption, he realized, was not a moment, it was a path walked patiently over time. The wind moved softly across the water, carrying away the heaviness that once defined them. Rita turned forward without hesitation, stepping into the life she had created. Daniel remained for a moment longer, then followed his own road with new humility. Their story had not circled back to where it began. It had moved ahead, toward accountability, growth, and the quiet promise that even after profound mistakes, new beginnings are still possible. As this story comes to an end, remember that behind every luxury lies a truth few ever see. If this story moved you, support the channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Until the next unforgettable true story, stay inspired and stay curious.